well, it is just a little over 10 o'clock here. I'm in lovely Chicago here at the NAR Leadership Conference today, and super excited to talk to you guys about a very, very important topic that I think can make our whole industry work together much more effectively. So we're going to talk today about how do we create a productive CEO volunteer leadership partnership, because we've heard, some things, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But before that, I thought I would just introduce myself and our company, because I'm not sure if all of you know about Wave Group and know the kind of the scope that we do. So myself, I'm the CEO of Wave Group and the president of our other company called RE Technology. I'm also proud to say this year I am the chair of the National Small Business Association. So I've been advocating not only for homeownership rights and property rights that we all work on, but also for all small businesses, which about 92% of everybody in real estate is considered a small business. So I've been doing that as well. Do all kinds of things from keynotes to advocacy. Really, one of my main goals is to be a change agent, which we'll talk about today. And before that, I used to be at Fisher-Price. Some of you may have tripped over my toys at 3 in the morning. I did strategic planning and senior VP marketing there. And I was also the CEO of a software startup company. So I've done all kinds of fun things, all of which have brought me some of the perspectives that we're going to talk about today. So I'm so excited to have you all here. It's great to be here. So just real quick about who's Wave Group, right? What do we do? So many of you may know me as someone that works primarily in the Association MLS space, but the truth is our company works in really all of the main sectors. We work in the consumer space, we do mortgage and title, technology, we work a lot with brokerages, and we work not only in North America, but around the world. So we have a lot of fun with that. And our team is very diverse and super smart. We've got PR experts, disaster communications experts, business technology, even emerging technologies and all the crypto space, brokerage, M&A, and valuations. We have a full marketing agency. We do all kinds of fun things. So just wanted to let you know about that. We're not just what you're going to see today. We do a lot of other things. And again, having that perspective of the whole industry informs some of the ideas that we're going to be bringing you today. So super excited to talk about it. So my personal passions within that, I love to do a lot of things, but I really have kind of 3 key areas that I focus on, all of which, in my view, can help create what I call positive waves of change. The first is executive recruiting and HR consulting, which will be kind of relevant to what we're talking about today. But I also do a ton of strategic planning. When I was at Fisher-Price, I was actually head of strategic planning globally for a Fortune 100 company. So I bring a lot of those disciplines. And then, as some of you may know, we do a lot of industry research, a lot of consumer research, because we believe those insights help inform everything we do, from leadership to focus to training to everything. So all of these things kind of inform what we're going to be talking about today. And if any of you need help with any of those things, I'd love to talk to you about that. But I'm going to go back to something which is what this whole webinar today started with. I wrote an article 2 or 3 weeks ago talking about an observation that I had about this. There's just some amazing executives in our industry that have been fired in the last 12 to 18 months. And every time I get the call from someone, I'm upset, I'm sad. I hear what are many times what seem to be very irrational decisions, where someone says, well, we're changing directions, or, hey, we don't like the color of the clothing you wear, or I didn't think you liked me, or a lot of things that appear to be not the way a professionally run relationship works, right? They're not being based on the things that really matter for the organizations. They're being based on other types of sort of non-functional things. Some people are literally getting text messages even when they have employment contracts in place. So it's a little crazy out there. And I think some of you that are on the call, unfortunately, may have fall victim to one of those, or you certainly know people that have, if you personally haven't, right? And so I looked at all of that and said, frankly, I wrote it because I was mad. And I don't think the person was the final straws on the call today, but she's recording it. I was just mad that these great people doing great things in organizations that frankly need leadership more than ever, with everything going on in our business, we're creating this disruption for what seemed to be not logical reasons from where I sat, right? And so there's got to be a better way to do this, right? So what my goal with this really is to say, what can we do to create productive relationships so we don't have these kinds of things happening anymore, right? We don't have the time. We have much more important things to worry about right now. Like, how are we going to make sure buyer's agency stays around? How are we going to make sure that we truly serve the needs of the consumer? How are we going to advocate for, homeownership rights that matter? those are the things we need to be focused on. So it was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. So I started to think about it, wrote that first article. A lot of you commented, shared it, said, wow, you're right. We've got to do something. And so that's kind of what we're here to talk about today is, what can we do? So here's something, and this came from church. I'm not real churchy, but sometimes you get inspired, right? Our pastor this weekend was talking about, we're kind of in the world of the I generation, right? And he was talking about it in the context of the church, but it's very relevant for what we do too, right? That many times in our industry now, we have people that are coming to associations saying, what can you do for me? Right? Not what can I do for you, but what can you do for me? And we have people coming in and are sort of looking for a place to be in charge, right? And that can be AEs, that can be CEOs, that can be volunteer leaders, right? But it's the in charge part that is sort of got some, subtle, maybe I need power, I need control. That's not what associations need, right? We need collaboration, we need engagement, and we need to all work together to really protect our industry and to protect the best interests of the homeowners that we work with. So I thought, it's something to start thinking about is maybe we've got to start talking a little bit more about that there's nothing more we than an association, right? And when we come to it with an attitude of more, it's all about me, that's when we might get ourselves in trouble. That's where people get canceled and all the crazy things that happen in our world in general, right? They've sort of spilled over into the association world. And this is something that I see happening all the time, right? Hope your animation's working for you. I see kind of a, no, I'm in charge. No, I'm in charge. No, I should be telling you what to do. No, you should be telling me what to do. And that's not the right answer, right? The right answer is somewhere in the middle, right? We want to get to a balance where we're working together. We're not just bouncing back and forth and pretending that somehow winning or losing, which is kind of what that spectrum is showing, is the right answer. The right answer is we work together, right? And even when you look at some of the things that are even published today, there's kind of this description that frankly I don't fundamentally agree with, where it's sort of, if you look at some of the things of the roles and responsibilities, it kind of looks at the CEO, it's more the administrative side of the house, and the leadership side is more the strategic side of the house. And frankly, I don't really agree with that. I think we're leading this together, and that balance and that cohesiveness in the organizations we work with, where I see amazing relationships. In fact, we were talking about this article yesterday at lunch, and there was a gentleman that we've worked with who's amazing volunteer leader who has been around forever, loves his organization. And I was telling him the story about how, many people get fired, and he's like, why? What happens? Like, why don't they just work together like we do? And I was like, that's a very good question. I don't know. But when it works, it's brilliant. And you've all, I'm sure, hopefully experienced it. When it works, it's wonderful. It's fun. So many things get done, right? And we don't get to this place where there's this random firing. I've heard of people that have been at their jobs less than 3 months and they're walked out the door, even though they have employment contracts. It's just crazy, right? So we want to get away from that. That is not helping any of us, especially people that are CEOs. And frankly, any member of an organization, where you see a churn on the CEOs, that means that there's a lack of continuity, a lack of strategic focus, and that's not helping anybody. It's certainly not helping members, and it's certainly not helping the clients that they serve. So that's really what I'm here to do, is what can we do, right? And I don't have all the answers. I'm just going to throw out some ideas, and I'd love to get some feedback from you guys. But it's just, I think it's a topic that's overdue to have a more public discussion about and to get more proactive about from the expressions I've gotten from all of you. So I started to think about it, and it's like, well, what does an effective CEO leadership partnership look like? What's got to be done to create that cohesiveness? And I've kind of started with, I think, of sort of 3 pillars of that idea. Again, wide open to you guys having other suggestions and to ask questions, but let's just kind of go through the flow. And then again, feel free to jump in, ask a question, make a comment. I'm dying to hear what you guys have to say about all of this. I'm going to check real quick. I see a couple of questions that are in here already. Oh, not that one. Let's see. Oh, someone said, can we get a recap email with the video? Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. There will be recordings, because there's a lot of people that are in session right now that can't make it to this. So we'll definitely be providing a recording of this. So let's just start with the first pillar. Okay. So the first pillar from where I sit is active measurable strategic plan and execution. And this is very consistent, by the way, with what we're here and learning at the leadership conference. So I'm not saying anything that hasn't already been discussed, but I know if some of you are not here, maybe you can benefit a little bit from this thinking, right? The second pillar of it is to have clearly defined roles and responsibilities and clearly understand what our job is. And, one of the things that I think about is, coaching or managing a CEO is not something that frankly many people in real estate have done, right? We have small businesses. Some of us are our own CEOs. We haven't worked in large corporations, which is, basically what an association or an MLS is. It's a large corporation. And so we really fundamentally don't have that training, right? So we need to level set and help people understand what it means to manage a senior level executive and what it means to, more importantly, to manage them effectively and to work with them cohesively, right? And then the third piece, and these are all connected in some way, is a clear process for measuring that performance, right? So if we have objective measures that we're using, and truly we're evaluating our CEO leadership based on those objective measures, certainly not everyone's going to achieve every single goal, right? There's association executives that have, frankly fallen down on the job in some cases. There's been times when, and let's use a couple of obvious examples, when when COVID hit, right? Everybody had their normal strategic plans, and then it was like, oh, just kidding. We're going to all stay in our houses for 3 years and let's see what that looks like, right? We've had the settlement, we've had so many things in our industry, 2008, 9, 10, what was that, right? Where did that come from? So we've been through adversity. We've come out of it, frankly, I think stronger on the other side in many cases, and more nimble and more open-minded in some cases, more humble in other cases. But it's time for us to think about a process that can help address some of these issues where we get to these what seem like irrational firings, right? They don't make any sense. So let's start with the strategic plan. I do a ton of strategic plans. As I mentioned, I grew up doing strategic plans. It's one of my passions in life. I know most people don't share that passion, but I do think it really can be the basis of success for a lot of these things, right? So and there was a great statement made yesterday. They said, don't have a strategic plan that's the elf on the shelf. I thought that was great, right? You put it on a nice pretty poster, you put a little laminated piece, you put it in the drawer, and no one ever looks at it again. Those are not strategic plans. Those are what I call forced family fun exercises, right? We get in a room, we sing Kumbaya together, we get all excited, and then nothing changes. That's not a strategic plan in my mind, right? We have to do something that's truly actionable, that's current, that's evolving consistently, right? That's what they look very different. So, the best strategic plans really start with sort of level setting the conversation about, we've got to first, all of us sort of lay down our gotta haves, or we've always done it that way, or I would never think about that, right? We have to open our minds up. And that's a lot of what we do in strategic planning. It's just, let's get us in a place where we can take risks, we can be vulnerable, we can throw out ideas, we can have people, bounce against those ideas, say they like them, they don't, and here's why, right? So, and ideally, we all learn something not only about the association we're working with, but our own businesses, right? Because we're in an ecosystem. What affects one part of our business affects all of our businesses. And so we can think about it that way, right? So you get to some strategic goals, usually, ideally, with feedback from brokers, from members, from affiliates, from even the community in some cases, right? So that when we're looking at goals, it's really thinking about how to address the needs of the entire ecosystem. And then from there, it's not just, pretty pictures or lofty words, right? They're quantitative goals that have a continuum, right? So we move from member satisfaction from 82 to 84 to 86 over a 3-year period, as an example, right? And then there's action items that go with that, right? You can't just say, and this is one of my favorites, I've seen this so many times, we want to be the voice of real estate. What does that mean? What does that mean specifically? Right now, there was another thing that was talked about this week, is we need to figure out a way to respectfully educate and sort of push back against some of the misinformation, lots of misinformation that's out there these days. And so how do we do that, right? So instead of saying being the voice of real estate, you might say, well, we want to get, a mention every single month in our local paper. We want to get so many social media posts, whatever. You figure out what those goals might look like, right? but it's something that's action oriented, that can be monitored, that can be continually evolve and continue to be course corrected as we see what works and what doesn't, right? It's a living, breathing document. It's not an elf on the shelf. I thought that was a great expression. And, a lot of times, especially now, we've had strategic plans, frankly, that were kind of like business as usual, right? And there are certain things that associations do, and hopefully will always do, that will be consistent, right? Building professional standards, effective education programs, tapping into local, state, and national advocacy initiatives, being part of RPAC, et cetera, right? But there are things that we have to think proactively about. Open MLS is one that's a big conversation right now, right? How, should we open up and invite all licensees into our MLS organization as an example, right? But there's all kinds of them, right? And so an ideal strategic plan recognizes and reveres and respects the strengths that we've already had in the continuity of things we need to continue that are working well, but it also recognizes that there may be some things we need to test or to try or to completely shift on just based on whatever's happening, right? So it's a much more fundamental discussion than like I say, a forced family fun exercise where we get in a room, talk about the same things, complain about the same things, and then nothing changes. And there's a really important component of this that are, people call them KPIs or key performance indicators, but these are really important, right? So these become how we can monitor and work with each other closely, right? So if we have a goal, let's just use that press mention that I mentioned as an example, right? And let's say we want to have a press mention at least monthly, right? So there's a specific number. There's a number that ideally people believe is maybe a bit of a push, but is attainable. We're not going to say we have no press mentions and now we're going to have 150 every month because that's crazy, right? They're relevant, right? It's something that matters to the organization. They're very specific. The more specific, the better. And they drive it. These are all based on what you've agreed are important strategic goals. They drive resources, right? So again, using that media example, well, do we have someone currently that on staff that could help us with that? Do we have a resource we might be able to, to contract to help us with that? What kind of money does that take? And if it does take money, does it have to pull from something we don't think is important, right? So defining what those key performance indicators are super, super important. And there should be a good variety of them, right? So you're not just using one tool to measure, you're looking at the organization from a variety of different perspectives. So this again comes to life, right? So ideally, the board leadership is looking at these on whatever basis makes sense. Some of them might be monthly, some of them might be quarterly, some of them might be annually, some of them might be as a project is achieved, right? They're all different, but they're really important because if you don't have that, then again, it becomes just sort of a fluffy, we feel good about ourselves goal. But if you pass your leadership from one president to the next, and they say what was achieved last year, you can tell them specifically what was achieved when you have these. If you don't, it's a lot more difficult to sort of, be tangible about what was going on. So this is really important. This is one of the most important things to bring a plan to life and not make it an elf on the shelf. And here's an important element too that can, I think, make it a little more digestible. If you look at a 2 or 3 year plan, there can be lots of action items. There can be 3 to 5 major strategic goals, and they can get a little overwhelming, right? And so sometimes what happens is we all get excited and we want everything to happen in the next 3 months, right? And that's not realistic. And then sometimes we kind of overestimate our short term, but we underestimate our long term, right? And then we don't get started on things, or we don't think we can get started on them for whatever reason, and they languish and they go for a long time, right? So one of the things that we suggest is breaking it down into like 12-week or quarterly, as they call it in software development, sprints, right? So outline those overall strategic goals and objectives and priorities, but then break it down into something where when you're not living and sleeping and eating and breathing these things, right? Because, leaders come in and come out. They have a real job. This isn't their primary thing. Break it down into manageable chunks, right? That regular people can say, okay, we talked about this project. I think that's reasonable that we're going to make some major progress on it in 12 weeks. Terrific, right? Or, hey, we're going to start 2 or 3 projects and we might get 20% of the way there, 40% on another one, and 30% on another one. But we're monitoring what's going on. So we're holding ourselves accountable as a team, as a partnership, to say these are the things that we need to do. And then At the end of that quarter, we're reporting on it. We're evaluating our results critically in a positive way, though, right? In a proactive way, saying, "Hey, maybe we overestimated what that looks like," or "Hey, wow, we just got another lawsuit. That's all bets are off. We got to go do something else." Things can change, as we know, but we look at those together and then course correct as we might need to, and then we again go back to the annual or the even 2 or 3 year goals, and we outline the goals for the next quarter or the next sprint, right? So we break it down so it's not so overwhelming, because there's a lot of things that go on within associations, as we know, and it's really difficult for all of us, especially if it's not your full-time job, to keep track of it, right? So break it down, make it easier for people to understand it. And then all of that I just said, especially those KPIs and the action items, are what the center of this partnership is, and it's really what we're measuring in terms of strategic plan execution. That becomes, instead of personality issues or style issues, and those things can exist, right? We always have to work through those, but the more productive discussion talks about what are we trying to do with the organization, what role are we playing in the community, how are we helping realtors to succeed, and that's what we focus our energy on when we're building the strategic plan, and then when we start to evaluate performance down the road. So if we can center on things that are higher, basically bigger than all of us, right? That are more important than any one individual that's in this process, and we can kind of sit on the same side of the table and work together and say, what are the best ways we can do this? That can make for a much more productive relationship. Again, where I've seen where associations are really, really working well is there's a ton of trust, there's respect. It doesn't mean there isn't disagreements, doesn't mean there isn't discourse. It doesn't mean there isn't times when everyone in the room is very uncomfortable about whatever's being talked about or about a move that just might need to be made, but it still means people can work together very well. So that's the first one, is you got that baseline, having a strategic plan, having it in a way that is measurable, that has specific actions that frankly everybody understands. That's the other thing, is sometimes people don't even know what we're talking about. So it's got to be sort of buzzword free wherever it can be, right? Or if there are buzzwords, explain what they mean so that people feel like they're all on the same page about what we're doing. And frankly, as a volunteer leader, there's so much happening right now. This business, you're working twice as hard to get half as much. It's just how it works at the moment. So if we can help people not only understand what we're doing, but really help them to feel good about the time that they're taking away from their business to spend energy on these kinds of things, right? That can help not only them continue to be involved, but potentially encourage others to become great leaders as well. So the second part of this, the clear understanding of the roles and the partnership, right? This is where I think sometimes it breaks down, is there isn't necessarily a completely clear understanding of who does what or who should do what. I think many times volunteer leaders, and as a current chair of a non-for-profit association, I can relate to this myself, right? You come in and you want to be sure that you're doing everything you can do to support the organization. At some level, you want to see if there's, you can leave it just a little bit better off than it was before you got there, right? And so trying to understand what that means and how do you appropriately provide an impact to the organization is really important. And that's sometimes, again, where things can go awry, right? So thought it'd be helpful to just kind of in a global sense talk about those things, right? So from a joint perspective, meaning both sides of the partnership, right? Having both groups build and support a strategic direction, priorities, and execution and measurement, like we just talked about, is critical, right? It's, again, sometimes it's described that strategic planning is the role of the board. Certainly they are a key part of the role of the board, of the process, but so are the CEOs, so are the staff, right? The staff has the reality of what works, what doesn't, what they've tried, and what members are talking to them about on a daily basis, right? So to have a mutual respect of that, there's domain expertise from the association leadership side, and then there's a market reality leadership that can come, and a business leadership relationship that can come from the volunteer leaders. But coming together, again, working on that as a partnership is super important. Another one, and this is always important, but it's even more important now because I don't think we're done. I think there's more lawsuits coming. I think the DOJ's got some more things up their sleeve. We got to pay attention, right? So continually evaluating potential scenarios and even threats, right? Again, nobody wants to think about these things, But if at every board meeting, you even spend 10 or 15 minutes on a what if scenario, like what if this happened, what would we do? It gets you geared up to continue to think about the future. And it gets everybody thinking about things that what I found is when we do these sometimes, you'll have a scenario described and it's like, well, what if that happened? Well, we do this, 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 and this, and this. And everyone in the room goes, but great, those are great ideas. Why are we waiting? Let's just go do those ideas right now, right? So sometimes it creates short-term opportunity, even though you may be looking at what potentially could be a longer-term issue. It's super important to understand what's going on with members, right? How engaged are they? How diverse is the engagement? Is it the same 50 people that do everything, or are we, engaging different parts of our audience with different types of programs? And of course, measuring their level of satisfaction, their perceived value of the organization. As many of you are probably aware, with the, many of the proposed settlements with individual franchises and brokerages, there are 600,000 agents that belong to brokerages that have settlements that say they cannot require NAR membership any longer, right? Doesn't mean that they won't continue to support it, and most are, from what I can see, luckily. But we have to remember that we have to earn our way with them, right? Because almost half of the business has now a legal mandate that they can't require it. So it's like, if it comes to getting sued again or joining the association, some are going to lean toward, I don't want to get sued again, right? So we have to really understand what's happening out there. Continually testing. I had the funnest job I ever had in my life. Funnest, don't you love that word? When I was at Fisher Price, my title was the Chief WOW Officer, and that stood for Wild Opportunities Worldwide, right? And so I got to do all kinds of fun stuff in little micro doses, right? We didn't take, all of Fisher Price's brand and throw it against the wall and hope for the best. We tested little programs consistently. And that's one way to continue to create incremental improvement. If there's a great book, if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it, called Atomic Habits. And Atomic Habits talks about 1% improvements and how those little 1% improvements can continue to add up to make huge differences. So I'd highly recommend you take a look if you haven't. And then importantly is we've all got to keep an open mind. There's nobody within our whole ecosystem, and even consumers, that can't bring a good idea to the table, right? That can't try something different, that can't model something. And whether it's in your local market or across the country, paying attention, staying open, staying nimble, and importantly, staying humble. I didn't put that there, but that's always super important too. That can make a big difference, right? So the whole group has to do this. Then I'm going to break it down a little bit into sort of, what CEOs have to do and what volunteers have to do. So, from the role of the CEO is to really help the organization get where it wants to go, right? The strategic plan has helped us figure out where we want to go. The job of the CEO is to get us there, right? So they have to drive execution, manage the operations, make sure the financials are strong and are meeting the goals that have been approved. And importantly, keeping volunteers moving forward in the sense of keeping them excited about what's going on, showing that progress and showing how their contribution has really been meaningful, but also continuing to educate them about what might be around the corner next. That could, they could hurt the organization. In some cases, could take out the organization, right? And moving forward in the larger context too of, getting involved at the state level, at the national level, talking to, fellow associations and MLSs around your state, around your region, all of those things, right? So they're kind of in the driver's seat of making it happen, if you will. And then the role of the volunteer, I think this is where sometimes it crosses over. I think sometimes volunteers believe it, and I think with their hearts in the right place, that, hey, if I suggest something, I'm going to have to help make it happen. And in certain cases, that's true, right? If it requires sort of a peer-to-peer, broker-to-broker, agent-to-agent communication or outreach, then yes, the board does have to get involved. But a lot of their job is not so much to execute it as it is to evaluate, right? So what are the kinds of assessments they should be looking at? And we talked about the key performance indicators, right? What kinds of improvements can they suggest based on what's changing in the marketplace, or how they're seeing things that the group is organizing or rolling out as being perceived, right? Looking at those results, sharing those results, providing feedback, and frankly, being cheerleaders, right? That's always a great role for the volunteers to talk about, and how can we as staff leaders arm them with sound bites of things that they can use to talk about how proud they are of the organization and the great work that's being done, right? So They can be the cheerleaders too, but they don't necessarily have to feel like they have to drive every decision, because sometimes what happens, especially in an environment where we're moving so quickly, is that we sort of get analysis paralysis, or we get committed to death, right? Where something gets in a committee, kind of falls to the bottom of their priority list and just doesn't go anywhere. And if it's a priority for the organization, it's got to keep going regardless of where it falls on that list, right? So if we think of it more as we build the strategy together, we build the direction together, then one makes it happen and the other one continues to make sure that it provides the oversight and the continual feedback and continual improvement, creates for a very good dynamic, right? It's not one trying to be the other. As soon as we start to cross into each other's lanes, we've heard that expression way too many times, stay in your lane, but it's so true. And of course, it's everyone's role to collaborate and be respectful. That's sometimes what I see breaking down is there's a lack of trust. There's a lack of belief, for whatever reason, deserved or not, that somehow association executive CEOs, don't have all the answers. And of course, nobody has all the answers. That's just how it works today in business and everywhere else. But we really have to figure out how we give each other grace, how we, this world we're in right now is a perfect example, right? Nobody knows exactly how to do a transaction today. Two title companies tell you how to finance things different ways. Mortgage companies are not exactly clear, right? So we all have to sort of have some patience, some trust, and some, fundamental belief. Our job is to serve the needs of the consumer. And we do that, it will all work out. And we just have to work through these things together, right? As soon as we get impatient with one another, start blaming one another, which is even worse, that's when things start to fall apart, right? And, it's hard sometimes because these kinds of times breed insecurity. They breed uncertainty. None of us really know. Are we going to have a job tomorrow? I don't know if I'm going to have one. I don't know if you're going to have one, right? So thinking about how do we hold hands even tighter at times like this and lock arms and say, we're going to keep moving forward. It's super critical. Okay, and then the third component of this is really a clear process for measuring this performance, right? This is where I think a lot of times I'm seeing things break down is CEOs are getting fired for things that have nothing to do with what's in the strategic plan. I've never gotten a call in the last 18 months where someone has said, well, they said I didn't execute, a strategic goal number 2 well enough. They're never about that. They're much more about, oh, my personality clashed with theirs, or they didn't believe that I was, I don't know. They're so many times they're much more small issues. They're much more relationship issues. They're not about what really matters. And so as a volunteer, you have to understand what really matters, right? You don't have to be best friends with the CEO to do a great job as the volunteer president. You don't, or volunteer board of directors, or committee chair, or anything, right? Doesn't mean that you don't want to like each other. I don't mean that, but that's not what it's about. This is not a club. It's a trade association. We're here to drive performance. We're here to drive success. We're here to drive opening doors to help it, easier for our members to be able to succeed. And of course, to support their clients in the ways they want to. So how do we get people to recognize what and how to evaluate a CEO against? And that's kind of what this chunk's about. Okay. I'm going to stop for a second, see if there's any questions too before I move on. I think we're good. I'm going to keep going. Okay, so what is a performance management, right? So I think some of the things that, if many of you have probably been in corporate life, we were trained on sort of how HR performance review processes work, right? So you would have at least annual reviews on very specific tactical things that were part of the job that you were responsible for, that the employee was responsible for. If for whatever reason somebody felt like you weren't doing your job, they might put you on what they call performance improvement plans or some other iteration of that, right? And many of us, again, that came from the corporate world, were trained on that stuff. Well, not everybody's come from the corporate world, right? Some grew up in real estate, some grew up in medical professions, some grew up in lots of different places, and didn't learn how to do that, right? So that's one of the things I think we could do is let's create more of a level set of how do we perform, or how do we perform together, but how do we evaluate performance as well, right? So here's some suggestions that I have that I've seen work really well in corporations that we've worked with. So the first one is to think about, as I mentioned earlier, take the strategic plan and break it down into quarterly chunks or quarterly deliverables, right? so that you've got something you can look at sort of in the short term. And then importantly, allows us to sort of have a important performance discussion, not just one time a year, but 4 times a year, right? Because how many things happen between January and December? Do we even remember what the association did in January by December? No, we can barely remember what we ate for lunch yesterday, right? It's just, there's so much going on, right? So breaking it down and having the discipline to have a quarterly discussion. And with that, and I'm going to build some of these out, and I'll be happy to share these with you guys, but build a sort of a performance evaluation spreadsheet, for lack of a better name, right? So what I would envision on that, and what we've used in the past, is you start with the key strategic goals and the strategic action items that were intended to be achieved that quarter, in addition to other things like managing financials and managing employee development and things like that, right? You put all of that down, and then the CEO and the volunteer leaders, whoever is responsible for working with the performance reviews for the CEO, and those are different in different organizations. You sit down, you look at each other's scores, see where you're in alignment, where you might be different, and you discuss those results, right? And it's important for us to look at those and say, okay, is there time to discuss? Do we have to shift something around? Did something happen since when we started this quarter that we have to, it has to move up or it has to move down for whatever reason? Have we figured out that we can't afford something, or hey, we found a partnership where we can do it with someone where we don't have to do it all on our own? All of those kinds of things in a working, breathing document, in a working, breathing process can change, right? Again, we're no more elves on the shelf. This is like, we're working it on a daily basis. And importantly, this is a really good time, if there is any performance concerns, or if there is any relationship breakdowns on either side, where we create an environment where we can talk about those concerns, right? So if somebody, there's someone on the leadership team that's not jiving for whatever reason with the CEO about something, this is the time, in a quiet, safe, protected setting, to have those conversations, right? And to, again, draw it and to focus it around what is the actual job that has to be done, and what are those deliverables that we all have believed are going to help our organization be stronger and better serve the needs of our customers, right? So if you have that chance to do it and you document that once a quarter, by the time you get to the end of the year, number one, you have 4 different pieces to look at, and you remind yourself of all the great things that have been accomplished. But again, you have a much more objective, collaborative method for providing feedback on what the association executive CEO has been doing or hasn't been doing. And frankly, with a great trust relationship, it can go the other way as well, right? So a CEO can say, I really need your help with this or that, or this or that, right? Or, hey, I think our communications we're in sync on, goal 1, 2, and 3, but I think with 4, maybe we're still a little off base. Can we talk about that, right? So it creates an open dialogue, and again, deepens that trust, deepens that respect for one another, and just gives you, a chance to really document. Now, sometimes when I say this, people go, once a quarter, are you crazy? We're too busy. It's like, I get that. This is a commitment. It's not easy, but it's probably the most important work you can do to ensure that the leadership and the CEO are working together to drive the best interest for the customer, you're ultimately to your member. And importantly, those kinds of conversations, and frankly, everything that happens in the board meeting, should continually drive toward the future, right? We can't look backwards. We can't hold on because it's comfortable. We have to let go of some certain things, and we have to continually think about the future. So the CEO can bring new ideas. She or he can bring in outside speakers that can talk about things. She or he can share research studies, whatever it might be, right? And of course, have dialogues and discussions and ask what's going on out there. What dynamics are you seeing, brokers? What are your agents struggling with? Are there any things we can help with, right? So you're continually evolving in terms of the service level and the value that you're delivering based on how the market is changing, because we know our market can change on a dime, right? It does it all the time. Okay, so, is all this stuff difficult? Yes. Would I say it's easier to have a one-day fun session, put a few fluffy things on a piece of paper and put it away? Is that easier than doing what I'm saying? It absolutely is easier, no question. But is it more effective? Does it really help us ensure that each of our organizations is going to be relevant and viable down the road? I would say maybe not, right? So Again, if I haven't said it, I'll say it again. When I first wrote this article, I wrote it frankly because I was just mad and frustrated because I was watching friends of mine who I know are good at their jobs losing their jobs. And I just got mad and I said, I know that there's some things we can do differently, and I'm just going to write about this. And when I did that, many of you came to me and said, wow, you're right. We need to do something. And apparently there's been a lot of this discussion those that have been in this world for a long time. And I think some frustration that maybe we haven't really found some tangible ways to try to solve the issues, right? So for what it's worth, and I'm going to ask you guys to give me feedback on these ideas. And these are very new and very rough because literally I just wrote the article a couple of weeks ago. And I just had some great discussions yesterday with some of the folks here at the leadership. So I wanted to show you a thought that I had and wanted to get your opinion on that. So one thing that I didn't write here, I'm going to grab water real quick, excuse me. That many people have talked about, and I think we could have a different discussion about this at a later date, is it would be great to have some sort of a peer review panel that if you could sense there was something going awry or that you had a discussion and you know something's going awry, that you had some folks to talk about, and it could be made up of a panel of really strong senior executive CEOs from associations, as well as well-heeled leaders that have done a great job running their organizations very productively as well, right? So there could be kind of a balanced conversation that could happen. And I think we can talk about that more down the road and what that might look like. But I had two ideas that I wanted to run by you today. So, it's like, so what could this look like, right? So I thought, I think part of the issue is that it's really not fair to volunteers. You get thrown in the deep end. You're asked to be the coach and manager of a senior level executive. Many people have never done that. Many people have never even been senior level executives, never mind manage them, right? And so it's like, what can we do that would make that process more effective and frankly, just not so scary? It's a lot to come on and be, to take on an executive role or even to serve on a board. So I'm thinking about a concept where there'd be a sort of a two-phase process. There'd be sort of a CEO level training module and a volunteer leader training module. And again, these are very rough ideas, but I'd love to get your feedback. So the first one would be for the CEO, first talking about how do we move away from the elf on the shelf concept to truly effective and active and measurable strategic planning and execution. How do we drive and how do we even facilitate open-minded future-focused discussions, or do we bring in resources to help us? But how do we create a focus on that, right? How do we define specific key performance indicators that are how do I say it? Aggressive but achievable, right? That we don't go from 0 to 100 in 1 year and expect that that's going to happen, because then that just makes everybody disappointed and frustrated and feels like they didn't achieve anything. To continue to drive home what are the roles and responsibilities, and how do we, even within that, there may be things where we need to go back into bylaws and to and operating policies and procedures and make things as clear as they need to be. What do we look at? And that there's some great people within the CEO space that are amazing at recruiting effective volunteers. I'll pick on Bob Hale. He's one of my favorite guys and does a great job with that. What are the best practices around that? What's training in terms of how to facilitate a effective board meeting, and how do we support our leadership in doing that? What are the effective communications approaches? Because we know that it is very difficult to boil down so many of the things that are relatively complicated that are being done, right? Especially to someone that has a full-time job and just comes in and out of this as they need to. And then again, how do we keep discussions, not jumping down into the weeds of things and sort of, reorchestrating something a committee's bringing to us, but how do we keep it at that higher level, right? And importantly, specifically related to the issues that we've been talking about, how do we build that, and document and bake it into bylaws and other things, a quarterly performance review process, right? What does it look like? What are we measuring it against? What formats are we using? What role does the CEO play versus leadership, things like that, right? So actually build that process. And these are things that I've done, which I'd be happy to help you guys with, that we can provide you these, right? You don't have to create it from scratch. And then also, how do we make sure that CEOs are really good at, as some have called it to me, reading the tea leaves, right? Asking the questions, how am I doing? Not even just during those quarterly things. Is this process, the way I'm communicating with you, working? Is this our relationship building the way you would? Is there anything that you would hope that we could be doing that we're not? Just continually asking those questions, right? Never assuming anything. And so that would be kind of the first component. Okay. And then I'm gonna show you the second one too. And then I'm gonna ask for if anybody has any comments or questions that they want to ask, I'd love to hear about it. So then the second component would be the volunteer module. And there'd be a lot of overlap, right? Because the idea is sort of to level set the expectations and build a partnership process that the CEO is comfortable with and has the tools they believe to make it work. And then to go to the other side, right? So talking about effective strategic planning and execution with them. Same thing, open-minded, future focused, like set the expectation. We're going to be doing that. And we want you to come to the table with new ideas. We want you to come to the table with, hey, what if kind of scenarios, right? It's not always, hey, we never done that before, so let's not try it. Training them on what a cohesive board meeting looks like, what their role is. And that can be a whole bunch of things from, not talking about things that could be considered antitrust to hostile and work environment, but even more importantly, I shouldn't say more importantly, as importantly, how do we have really thorough discussions? How can we have respectful discourse? And how can we really continue to move? And how can we be decisive, right? So we don't want to just, I've heard people say, "Oh, I don't want to be the president of the year that decision gets made." It's like, well, if you don't want to make decisions, you probably shouldn't be a president. That's what I would say back, right? But thinking about if there's something that needs to be decided, let's make the decision and move. We can always course correct, right? Nothing's perfect. Nothing's perfect in any one of our businesses, but we keep moving. And then helping people to understand what is a key performance indicator, why does it matter? How do we set them? How do we set them in a way that's, again, aggressive but realistic? And how do we monitor those? Clearly describing what do we do together? What do we do individually? And helping them to evaluate their own motivation, right? Why are they here? What role do they think they can really help to contribute? And what unique strengths can they bring to the table? How do we invite them to bring those unique strengths out? There's sometimes people do great things and we don't even know about it till they're almost done with their tenure, right? So how do we do all of that? And again, relative to this specific issue we're talking about, helping them teach about what is a performance review? Why does it matter? How do we do them? Why would we do them on a quarterly basis? How do you participate in them on a quarterly basis, right? And importantly, this is critical. Every state, as you guys are well aware, have different rules and laws about HR and about employment law, what you can and cannot say, when and how you can and cannot say it, right? Who can say it? I mean, there's a million rules that every state has, and they are different, right? The spirit of their laws are very similar, but there are specific things you can and cannot do in certain states. And importantly, because this one kind of baffles me, I've heard many people that get fired, even though they have employment contracts that have a specific resolution process articulated in them, and they just get ignored and people just push them out the door without that, right? So helping people understand what is the role of an employment contract, for those that need to understand specifically what's in the CEO's employment contract, what they are responsible for, what they're not responsible for. If there are performance issues, how do you resolve them? And of course, there's different types of performance issues. Some of them are serious enough that you do have to escort someone out the door. Many of them aren't, right? And then, the appropriate path for what are the types of issues that we can discuss? What are the types of issues that we can ask to be corrected? And how do we do that, right? It's really not fair to any of us if someone, expresses a concern and says, you're terrible at this, and then walks you out the door. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Maybe I can't improve on that. And maybe you're right, I won't be able to get there, but let's at least give people a chance, right? And so just making it a more calm, professional business relationship, but helping people understand what that means and what their role as the coach and manager of the CEO, what they're really up for doing. And again, what do the bylaws say? But importantly, what is the spirit of that collaboration and partnership that we're all here to do, right? We've got way too many things to do to fight each other. We got to worry about the people outside of our world, right? So I just, if anybody has any thoughts about that, let's see, I have a question. Let's see. One question, how important is it to follow Robert's Rules of Order in board meetings? Yes, that definitely can maintain civility. That's a really good point. Sometimes people get a little off on that. Some people kind of go the other way too, though. They use Robert's rules to not make a decision. So you have to be careful with that. But yes, absolutely, that is something that's super important. Let's see. Hit another one. So what happens when trust is broken with a CEO and the volunteer leaders then fall into two camps? They gravitate to micromanage because they don't believe what the CEO is saying, or they fall into blind compliance and don't hold the CEO accountable. Those are both things that happen all the time, right? And that's again why I'm talking about this management, this review process, right? So if it's clearly understood that the CEO's job is to drive the execution and the volunteer leadership is to set the tone, set the direction with the CEO, and to provide continual suggestions for improvement. Continual suggestions at the high level are not the same as why did you buy blue t-shirts and not green t-shirts, right? There's a difference there. And continually coaching people on, and that might be a whole section we'd want to have in this, is how to not micromanage the process and where your opinions really are valuable and wanted and needed, and where other things, you can kind of let them go. And I agree with you that, as I showed you that seesaw in the beginning, right? Sometimes it's too much that volunteer leadership think they're in charge, and sometimes it's the AE or CEO thinks they're in charge. And that's not good either, right? We need dialogue, we need conversation, we need to check our math and make sure people are taking the time to really understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, so they can provide you with that valuable feedback. But you're right, it can go, either of those is dangerous, right? The right answer is when that seesaw is in the middle and we're doing this a little bit here and there, but we're not going, wow, wow, that's just, it's dangerous. Yeah, let's see. Oh, there's some in Q&A too. Let me jump over there for a sec. Okay. Let's see. What if there was some formal mediation process at the state level or through an association management organization? We all basically work independently with no real HR function or protection. I totally agree with that. And that's what I'm hearing a lot, is I'm kind of out there all on my own. If somebody on my leadership, for whatever reason, has a problem with me, I don't really have any recourse, right? And that's the idea of, and I don't know who should do this. I'm happy to help in any way I can, and Wave Group's here to help too. But some sort of a peer review, peer arbitration, peer mediation, peer discussion. Hey, this is where we're having a challenge. Can you guys help us figure out how we can get back along? That is absolutely something that's needed. I totally agree with you. And I've had several CEOs come up to me and say, I will help you do that. I would love to be part of something like that, because I've gone through the school of hard knocks myself, right? That's what they're telling me. And they would love to help each other kind of go through that. And sometimes a volunteer leader is asking for something they don't know they shouldn't be asking for, right? And when you push back on them specifically, they think you're just pushing back on them. But if a third party group of people that knows a lot about this stuff said, actually, tell me what you're really trying to do. Well, there might be a way to do this, but exactly what you're asking for really isn't appropriate. And here's why. If they heard it from another group of people and not just the CEO directly, they're thinking that might be something to help. So if the person that mentioned that, if you have any interest in talking more about that, we'll definitely look at that. Let's see. What recourse do we have when our president won't enforce a civil culture? Okay, that's really important, right? Or hold a rogue board member accountable. If I was, in an internal organization, I could go to HR, but there is no role like that. It's the same issue, right? It's like, without having that, again, we could talk about, can we have sort of a third party group, but this training, and again, is any kind of training going to fix if someone wants to cause trouble? Is anything going to be 100%? Absolutely not. But can we try? That's kind of where I am from all the things you guys are telling me, right? And can we model, what does I don't know if any of you have ever taken as an analogy, like a sexual harassment prevention training video, and they sort of do like, case studies or a little role model of, if someone says this to you, that is not appropriate, right? Same kind of a thing. Like, could we do training where we'd actually have role modeling, and someone could talk about what a civil, cohesive, collaborative discussion looks like, and then someone could show one that isn't quite so much like that and talk about the differences and why that one doesn't work and where it leads you versus, right? So again, I think maybe some training on that about, why someone thinks that a civil conversation. I mean, it's just easier if we all get along, right? Not that we all agree. I don't mean that, right? Discourse and different ideas is really welcomed, but not at the point of demeaning one another on a board meeting. I've seen some crazy things. I'm sure many of you guys have too, or someone saying something inappropriate. I've seen people exhibit antitrust behavior in front, and I've had literally other board members get up and walk out to say, I feel like I'm at risk, I'm leaving. All of that stuff. That's the kind of stuff I'm hoping we can try to find a way to work together. It's never going to be gone 100%, but that we can build awareness of things and help people understand what's expected and frankly what's required if you're going to be a leader of an organization like this. So those are great conversations to have, and I appreciate those that have that have shared that with us. Here's one other one. How can we ensure that volunteer leaders genuinely understand organizational structures, HR policies, and other critical aspects? Again, I don't think many of them do, because frankly, they've never had to. If I'm an independent contractor and I work for a small brokerage, I've never managed a team. I've been in either in real estate my whole life, or I've been in other situations where I was more of an independent or individual contributors. I've never had to worry about these kinds of things, right? And so I do think it's up to us. The word orientation, whatever. I mean, I like the idea of calling it something like partnership training, or, association effectiveness training, or something along those lines, right? Where we can set the stage that, in order to do this, you really have to understand what it's like to run in, some cases several $100,000 organization, in some cases a several $1,000,000, some cases tens of millions of dollars in organizations, right? You don't run that the same way you run your own independent contractor business. It's a much different environment. And so again, can we fix it? I don't know, but I think we can try, right? And again, I think they don't always have the inherent skills to accurately assess the strengths and weaknesses of the CEO. I totally agree with you. That's exactly why I'm saying, if we can take it back from, I like you, or I don't like you, or I don't like your style, or the kinds of things I hear so often, and back to real tangible things. What is the CEO's job? What are their daily responsibilities? And whether that be, managing effective execution of programs, whether that be, turning the ship, opening up growth opportunities, whatever the strategic plan calls for, that's their core responsibility. And in these quarterly discussions, and maybe we need to have like a separate training just on the performance reviews. I could see how that might be possible. Maybe there's a third component to this. I don't know. Again, these are all brand new ideas, but ways for us to come to them and prepare them and arm them with what has to be done. And I think having it be somebody that's a third party, whether it's us or it's a trade association, or I don't really care, to be honest with you. I just don't want to see my friends keep getting fired. That's my biggest motivation here, right? Because if you have to say it directly to them, that can be very difficult, because it may look self-serving, right? You're not trying to be self-serving. You're really trying to serve the best interest of the organization, but sometimes somebody may interpret it that way, right? So having a peer review, or having a training program that's not specifically your again, who knows how it works out, right? But that would be the thought, is to try to deal with those kinds of issues. So again, if anybody has any feedback on kind of the scope that I articulated here, whether you want to tell me now or later, I'm happy to, take the critique at any time. But these are the kinds of things that, from where I can see, because remember, I work in strategic planning. I see where those work and where they break down. I work in executive recruiting. Why does that job exist sometimes? It's because an organization's churning through CEOs because they haven't figured out how to work together effectively, right? And while that might get me a job, it's exactly not the kind of job I want, right? I want the jobs where an organization is just loving each other, doing a great job. And you know what? Someone's been at that job and they finally decide, either they do such a good job that they get inspired and go somewhere else, an even bigger job, and everybody's really happy for them, or they retire, right? But it's not because they're churning through people on a regular basis. I talked to someone yesterday, they told me they've had 5 CEOs in the last 5 years. That's not good for the membership. That's not good for the homeowner. That's not good for creating a better brand image of what do realtors do in that local market, right? It's just not how it works. So we've got to find ways to create just better cohesiveness. And we know it works. We've seen some markets where it's phenomenal. We just got to take the best of what they're doing and apply it other places. And then again, when we're screening for executive leadership, if someone, and sometimes you don't know, so you guys know more than I do, you've gone through these things, right? But if you can sense that someone, may be someone that's contentious, right? Or that always has to have their own way, right? Or things like that, you may want to look at long and hard about, are those the kinds of people we need on the board? We need people that are going to put their own personal needs aside, and they're going to come and look for the greater good and do what makes sense to help the whole industry be strong, right? So something to think about. So, why all this? I mean, if, I get Pollyanna, I'm sorry, but I get excited about what we do in our industry. But if we get this stuff out of the way and we start working together really effectively, where we have great communication and great trust relationships, and we can agree to disagree and do it well and get through things and make decisions and keep moving, what can happen, right? Well, maybe we can find meaningful ways to engage every one of our members. One thing that I would say is, I think, and I don't have any data on this, but it appears to me that the number of people that are actively engaged and very loyal and consistently involved with their organizations, it seems to be getting smaller, right? And there's this whole other group of people out there that, for whatever reason, haven't found the way that they would like to contribute, or the way that they believe the organization is really meaningful and exciting to them, right? If we got rid of some of this drama, we could focus on things like this that really do matter, right? How do we figure out how to welcome in new impact-driven leaders? There's great, smart new people entering into the real estate industry every single day, right? How do we find them? How do we find those people that have had, great successful leadership experience in other industries they can bring to this, or have unique skills, that we don't have on our staff that we could borrow from them, right? How do we focus on stuff like that? And, here's another one. And I was thinking about this yesterday. When I think about realtors, I think about their hearts are about this big, right? They're really nice people. Realtors are nice people. They love their customers. They want to help them. They go way above and beyond, doing things that are not, quote, in their job description, because they know it matters, right? And what we do sometimes, not sometimes, often, is we tend to celebrate the financial success of realtors, not the emotional success of realtors, or the community success, however you want to describe it, right? And so maybe we need to think about that too. How do we bring the heart back, right? And not only into our own leadership, but into what we focus on, what we reward, what we talk about, what we celebrate, what we promote. And, this is a great, now we're in political season, and it's not about a Democrat or Republican. It's just a great saying. My mother told me this a million times when I was little. Not ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. It's the same thing, right? How do we get people so, emotionally excited about what we're doing, that they're coming to us saying, how can I help? What role can I play, right? If we get to that place, everything starts to turn, because now we have many more voices. We have many more great ideas that are coming to the table. And frankly, we have a reason why people want to stay. Remember, there's 600,000 right now that are not required to be realtors anymore. So what are we going to do? Let's focus on that issue. That's much more important in the long run, if we can figure out how to work together better, right? How do we drive home our value proposition? There's associations do so many great things, and many people don't even know what they do. Some of them don't even know they're realtors. I've had that conversation. They don't even know, well, I have a license. Does that make me a realtor? It's like, no, being a realtor makes you being a realtor. They don't even know the difference, right? And importantly, at the end of the day, what's our job? Our job is to help people succeed in their business. And that's what we need to spend our energy on. That's what we should be evaluating the CEO on, and all of us, right? Anybody that's involved with this, are we doing something to make our industry stronger, and to be, let's talk about how are we helping people live the American dream. At the end of the day, that's what we're here to do, right? So with that, any questions, comments, anything I haven't addressed, or anything else that you want to share? I know there's a lot of frustration out there. I can't believe the number of you that have reached out to me after I wrote just that one article. So I know there's something here. I'm just trying to figure out if there's anything I can do other than write about it. Certainly I can continue to do that if that helps. But if there's anything else I can do, and that we can do as Wave Group, to help within the industry or within our company and support you guys, we're here for you. Okay. So I guess that's all I can say. So does anybody else have any questions? Okay, so I got a couple more questions. Yes, we are recording this, and there's a lot of people today at the leadership that registered that want to get a copy of it because they're, busy doing other things today. So we're going to be sending it to everybody that registered. Feel free to share it. If anybody has any questions about it or any suggestions of how we might work together on something, we're here for you. So just, email me at Marilyn@Wave Group. The QR code actually helps you register for our newsletter, so you won't miss those kinds of articles again if you haven't seen our newsletter. Go there and we'll continue to focus on things like this. So, all right, with that, I will let you guys go. Thank you so much for your attention and for paying attention to this important issue. And again, if anybody has anything they need from us, feel free to reach out at Marilyn@Wave Group. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.